The sharp sting of the slap echoed through the room, leaving Adana's cheek burning as Beatrice's cold words followed. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" Beatrice sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. Adana stood frozen, her heart racing. In that moment, she realized that her journey had just taken a darker turn. Was it worth it? Would she be able to survive in this world of wealth and bitterness? Adana had always known that life wasn't fair, but she had never expected it to be this cruel. The day had been long, the heat unbearable, and her feet sore from walking the rough roads of Okibo. She was a banana seller in a small village, trying to make ends meet for her family. Her mother, Ngozi, was too weak to work, and her younger sister, Zikora, was still in school. That left Adana to shoulder the burden of supporting them both. She had grown accustomed to the grueling hours of the market, the constant heat, and the occasional insults from the wealthier folks who passed her by. But today had been different. As the sun began to set, Adana packed up her stall, exhausted but determined. She had made a small profit, but it wasn't enough to cover Zikora's school fees, which were already overdue. When she returned home, the sight of her little sister's sad face broke her heart. "Mama says I can't go back to school until the fees are paid," Zikora said, her eyes filled with tears. Adana didn't know how to tell her that they still didn't have the money. Instead, she promised Zikora that she would find a way. "Don't worry, Zikora, I'll make sure you go back to school. I promise." Her mother, Ngozi, gave her a worried look. "Adana, my daughter, you don't have to carry all this on your shoulders. You've been working so hard. I don't want you to burn out." But Adana was determined. She would not let her sister's future slip away because of money. The next morning, Adana woke up early. She had no choice but to work harder than ever. The sun was still low in the sky as she made her way to the market. The streets of Okibo were already busy, and the market was beginning to fill up with vendors and shoppers. Adana set up her stall, placing her bananas neatly for sale, calling out to people who passed by. "Bananas, fresh and sweet. Only 600 naira for a bunch," she shouted, trying to catch the attention of anyone who might need the fruit. As the hours passed, Adana felt the heat of the sun beating down on her. Her back ached and her feet throbbed, but she kept going. She had no choice. There were bills to pay, and her sister's school fees weren't going to magically appear. She worked through the day, selling as much as she could, but by the time evening came, it was clear that she hadn't made enough money to cover the bills. She sat on a low wooden bench in the corner of the market, feeling defeated. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to herself. Her family depended on her, and yet she was failing them. But before she could lose herself in despair, a sleek black car pulled up beside her stall. A tall man stepped out, wearing a white shirt and polished shoes. His presence alone made heads turn. Adana watched him as he walked toward her, his gaze sharp and focused. "How much for a bunch of bananas?" he asked, his voice deep and steady. Adana blinked, a little surprised by his sudden approach. He didn't look like someone who usually bought fruit in the market. 600 naira, sir," she replied, her voice steady. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out 1,000 naira note. He handed it to her, without hesitation. "Keep the change," he said. Adana frowned, unsure of how to respond. "No, sir, I cannot take extra money. Please, take another bunch of bananas." The man raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Most people would have kept the change, but you didn't. Why?" Adana stood her ground. "I work hard for every naira I earn. I don't take what I haven't earned." He smiled slightly, his interest piqued. "Interesting," he muttered, before turning and walking back to his car. "Keep the change," he repeated, but he didn't wait for her to answer. His mind was already elsewhere, wondering about this woman who had refused his generosity. The next day, as Adana arranged her bananas at her stall, she noticed the same sleek black car pulling up again. The man stepped out and walked toward her, looking every bit as polished as before. Adana couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. "Good morning," the man greeted her. "I'd like to buy another bunch of bananas." 600 naira, sir," Adana replied, offering him a bunch. Once again, he handed her 1,000 naira note. "Keep the change." Adana hesitated, the same sense of unease settling in her chest. "Sir, we did this yesterday. Please take another bunch." The man smiled, clearly amused. "I just wanted to see if you'd change your mind." Adana met his gaze, unwavering. "I do what is right," she said firmly. Tobias was taken aback. In a world where most people took the easy way out, her refusal to accept the extra money was refreshing. "You're rare, Adana," he said, moored himself into her. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to know more about her. Tobias returned to Adana's stall day after day, buying bananas, but also watching her carefully. He observed how she treated each person with respect, never overcharging, never taking more than what was fair. His curiosity grew with each passing day. One evening, as Adana packed up her stall, Tobias approached her again, his expression serious. "Adana, I need to ask you something," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Adana turned to face him. "Yes, sir. I see how hard you work. You're always honest, always doing what's right." Tobias said, "I want to offer you a job. I need someone to help in my house. The pay is good, and it will help with your sister's school fees." Adana blinked, surprised by the offer. "A job?" she asked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Tobias nodded. "Yes, I have a house and need someone to help keep it in order. I trust you, Adana. You're different from others." Adana felt a flicker of hope. Could this be the opportunity she had been waiting for? But something inside her made her cautious. "Why me?" she asked, her voice low. Tobias smiled slightly. "Because you're rare. Because you don't just work hard, you do it with honesty and dignity." Adana felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But could she trust him? Tobias watched as Beatrice stormed out of the house, her angry footsteps echoing down the hall. He turned back to Adana, who was still standing by the couch, her cheeks still red from the slap. The anger he felt toward Beatrice was palpable, but he couldn't let it show. He had to focus on the one thing that mattered now. "Adana, I'm sorry you had to go through that," Tobias said, his voice calm but filled with regret. Adana shook her head, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "It's all right, Tobias. I've had worse. It's nothing I can't handle." Her words struck Tobias like a punch in the gut. She had faced so much adversity, yet she stood there, stronger than anyone he knew. He couldn't help but admire her more, but there was also a growing concern. She was too strong, too proud. She never let anyone see her hurt, even when it was obvious. He had to change that. "I should have said something sooner. I should have told her to treat you with respect," Tobias said, stepping closer to her. Adana smiled weakly. "It's not your fault. I'll be fine." Tobias took a deep breath, his decision solidifying in his mind. "No, it is my fault, and I won't stand by and let you be treated like that again." Adana raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about this for a while now," Tobias began, looking down the floor, then back at her. "You deserve more than this. More than this house, more than this life. And most of all, you deserve to be treated with respect, like you truly are. I don't want you to feel like you're just working here. I want you to be a part of this family, if that's what you want." Adana was taken aback by his words. She didn't know how to respond. She had never expected anything like this from him. She had come here to work, to help pay for Zikora's school fees, and to keep her family afloat. But now, Tobias was saying something different. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, looking away. "I didn't come here to be part of any family. I came here for the job. I came here because I wanted to change our lives." Tobias nodded slowly. "And you have, Adana. You've already changed my life." Adana looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I've watched you, Adana. You've shown me that hard work, honesty, and integrity are worth more than money. More than anything else," Tobias said, his voice softening. "I've never met anyone like you. You have a strength I can't ignore, and I want to help you in any way I can." Adana felt a lump form in her throat. She had never felt like she truly belonged anywhere. But Tobias's words were like a lifeline. Could it be that someone like him, someone who had everything, was willing to see her as an equal? Could it be that she was worthy of something more than the life she had known? Tobias continued, his words carrying a weight that made her heart race. I've already paid for Zikora's school fees. Adana, I know you've been struggling, and I want to make sure she gets the education she deserves. But more than that, I want you to know that you don't have to do this alone anymore. You don't have to fight this battle by yourself. Adana's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry. The floodgates opened, and the emotion she had buried deep inside came rushing to the surface. She wasn't sure whether it was relief, gratitude, or disbelief, but she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had spent so long fighting, so long carrying the burden for her family. But now, Tobias was offering her something she had never had before, help. And more than that, he was offering her the chance to believe in herself. The following weeks passed in a blur. Adana found herself settling into a new routine, one that didn't involve struggling just to make ends meet. Tobias treated her with respect, and the house became more than just a place to work. It became a place where she felt valued. She spent more time with Tobias, learning about his life and his family. She began to see him not just as her employer, but as someone who genuinely cared about her well-being. He helped her navigate the complexities of her new life, offering guidance and support when she needed it most. But even as she grew closer to Tobias, a part of her remained guarded. She didn't want to get too attached. She couldn't afford to. She had been hurt too many times before by people who promised more than they could deliver. But Tobias was different. One evening, as Adana was cleaning the kitchen, Tobias approached her, his expression serious. Adana, can we talk? He asked. Adana looked up, wiping her hands on a towel. Of course, Tobias. What's on your mind? I've been thinking a lot about what we've talked about, Tobias began, about you being a part of this family, and about what I said before. Adana's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Tobias stepped closer, his voice softer than usual. I want to ask you something. Adana, I want you to stay here, permanently, not as someone who works for me, but as someone who's part of my life. I want you to be part of my family. Adana's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to say yes, but another part of her was terrified. She had never been part of anything like this before. I know it's a big ask, Tobias continued, his eyes searching hers. But I can't imagine my life without you in it. Adana felt a rush of emotions flood through her. She had never allowed herself to dream of a life like this. But here it was, right in front of her. A chance to be more than just a worker, more than just someone struggling to survive. I don't know what to say, Adana whispered, her voice trembling. Tobias smiled gently. You don't have to say anything right now. I just want you to know that you're important to me, Adana, and I want you to stay. For the first time in a long while, Adana allowed herself to think about a future beyond survival. Tobias's offer wasn't just about money or a job. It was about love. And as much as she wanted to deny it, Adana realized that she had already started to care for him. But could she let go of the past and accept the future he was offering her? Adana stood there, her mind racing. Tobias's words lingered in the air, echoing in her thoughts. She had never imagined that her life could take such a turn. From the dusty streets of Okibo to the grand house she now found herself in, everything had changed. She had worked so hard for so long, and for the first time, someone with wealth and power, was offering her more than just a job. Tobias was offering her a future. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the towel down on the kitchen counter, still trying to process what he had said. I don't know what to say, she finally managed, her voice small, vulnerable. It felt strange to allow herself to be vulnerable. But in Tobias's presence, something inside her shifted. Tobias didn't pressure her. Instead, he gave her the space she needed, his eyes soft with understanding. Take your time, he said gently. I just wanted you to know how I feel. Adana turned away from him, staring out the kitchen window at the city below. She had always been the one to shoulder everything on her own. She had carried the weight of her family's survival, without asking for help, without showing weakness. But here was Tobias, offering a life that felt like a dream, one she could never have imagined for herself. Could she trust it? Could she trust him? She thought about her sister. Zipporah, she thought about her mother. Ngozi, they all depended on her. For so long, Adana had worked with the sole goal of giving them a better life. But now, with this new opportunity, the choices before her felt daunting. Tobias, she began, her voice steady but filled with hesitation. You've been kind to me, more than anyone ever has. But I've worked so hard to get where I am. I've always had to fight for everything. I don't know how to let go of that. How do I just accept this? Her words came out in a rush, the weight of her emotions finally spilling over. Tobias took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. Adana, you don't have to let go of everything you've worked for. This isn't about giving up your strength or your independence. It's about sharing your life with someone who sees you, who values you. You don't have to fight alone anymore. His words cut through her defenses like a knife. For the first time, Adana realized that she didn't have to do everything by herself. Maybe she had spent so long believing that she couldn't trust anyone, that no one would ever help her, that she had forgotten what it felt like to rely on someone else. Adana swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. I've always been the one to protect my family, she said quietly. I've always been the one who had to carry everything. I'm scared, Tobias. I don't know how to share this burden with anyone else. Tobias gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and comforting. You don't have to carry it all, Adana. You're not alone anymore. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of the unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Adana nodded slowly, the decision settling within her. She had worked hard for everything, yes, but maybe it was time to let someone else in. Maybe it was time to accept that there were other ways to build a future, other ways to achieve her dreams. I'll stay, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I'll stay, Tobias. A smile broke across Tobias's face, and in that moment, Adana saw something in him she hadn't before, vulnerability, honesty, and a deep care that went beyond anything she could have imagined. In the weeks that followed, Adana settled into her new life with Tobias. She continued to help with the house, but now she also had time for herself, something she hadn't had in years. Tobias made sure she had everything she needed, and more importantly, he listened to her. He respected her, and for the first time in a long time, Adana felt like she was more than just a worker, more than just someone struggling to survive. She also began spending more time with Zipporah, helping her with schoolwork, and making sure her sister felt supported. Zipporah had always dreamed of becoming a teacher, and Adana promised herself she would do everything in her power to make that dream a reality. Adana had never experienced this kind of support before. Even though her relationship with Tobias had started out as a simple job offer, it had grown into something deeper, something that felt like it could last. She began to see Tobias not just as an employer, but as someone who truly cared about her well-being. She had always been afraid of getting too close to people, but now she realized that maybe letting someone in wasn't so scary after all. One evening, after a long day of work, Adana sat with Tobias in the living room, enjoying a quiet moment together. She had come to appreciate these small moments, the way Tobias would ask about her day, the way he always made sure she was comfortable, the way he never made her feel like she was just a servant in his house. Adana, Tobias said softly, breaking the silence. I've been thinking. I want you to know that you're not just here to work. You're part of my life now. You've made my life better in ways I never expected. Adana looked at him, surprised by his words. She had never expected to hear something like that from him, especially after everything that had happened with Beatrice. But somehow, Tobias's words felt genuine. I never expected to be here, Adana said quietly. I never expected to be part of your life, but I'm glad I am. Tobias smiled, and for a moment, Adana saw the warmth in his eyes, the sincerity that had shown her from beginning. I'm glad to. Adana, I don't think I could have made it through everything without you. As the weeks turned into months, Adana's life continued to change. She attended school again, something she had always dreamed of but never thought possible. Tobias supported her every step of the way, making sure she had everything she needed to succeed. She still worked in the house, but now it felt like a partnership rather than a job. Adana's feelings for Tobias grew. and she began to realize that she had found something truly special in him. He had been there for her when no one else had, and now she was beginning to feel something more than just gratitude for him. But even as her feelings grew stronger, Adana knew that there was still something she had to face. She had spent so many years protecting herself, guarding her heart, that it was difficult for her to let go of the past. She had been hurt before, and the fear of that happening again still lingered in the back of her mind. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, Tobias turned to her, his eyes searching her face. "Adana," he said, his voice soft, "I've been thinking a lot about us." Adana looked at him, unsure what he was about to say. "What do you mean?" Tobias took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "I care about you, Adana, more than I thought possible. I don't want to wait any longer to ask you this, because I'm sure of my feelings." Adana's heart skipped a beat. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready for it. "Tobias," she started, but he stopped her with a gentle touch on her hand. "I know you're scared, and I understand. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here for you," he said softly. "And I want to ask you, Adana, will you marry me?" Adana's breath caught in her throat. The question hung in the air, heavy and beautiful. For the first time, she felt like she had a future, one that was no longer dictated by survival, but by love, respect, and the chance to build something together. She looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she felt her heart open fully to the possibility of a future with him. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will." Tobias smiled, his eyes bright with a mixture of relief and joy. He reached out and gently cupped Adana's face, his touch tender. The weight that had been holding both of them in uncertainty seemed to vanish, and in its place was a promise of something new, something beautiful. "I never thought I'd meet someone like you," Tobias said, his voice low and sincere. "You've changed my life, Adana, and I can't imagine it without you now." Adana, still processing the rush of emotions coursing through her, took a deep breath. "I never imagined a life like this either," she admitted. "You've given me hope that I can dream bigger, that maybe there's more than just surviving." Tobias held her gaze, the connection between them undeniable. "We can build that together. Adana, whatever you want, we can make it happen." The warmth of his words made her heart swell. She had never imagined a future where someone would want to stand by her, truly, in all her struggles and strengths. She had always carried the burden alone, convinced that relying on others would only lead to disappointment. But Tobias had proven her wrong. His belief in her had slowly begun to reshape the walls she had built around her heart. As the days passed, Adana and Tobias continued to grow closer. They shared moments of joy, laughter, and even the quiet times when words were unnecessary. Tobias had invited her into his world, but she had also shown him a side of life he had never fully appreciated. The raw, untold strength of someone who had never known comfort, yet found a way to keep going. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Tobias asked her, "Do you ever think about where we'll be in a few years? What we'll have achieved together?" Adana leaned back, her eyes thoughtful. "I think about it," she said quietly. "I think about what it would be like to build a life where Zikora can go to the best school, where my mother doesn't have to worry anymore, where I don't have to wake up at the crack of dawn, trying to make ends meet." Tobias nodded, his hand resting over hers. "And I'll be there every step of the way. Adana, we'll make sure your dreams and Zikora's become a reality. You'll never have to go through anything alone again." For the first time in her life, Adana believed it. She believed that there was more to her future than the struggle. There was a possibility of love, stability, and success, not just for her, but for the people she cared about. Weeks turned into months, and the changes in Adana's life were undeniable. She continued to work in Tobias's house, but she no longer felt like an outsider. She was part of something bigger now, something that gave her the freedom to dream and build. Her relationship with Tobias grew stronger as they found new ways to support each other. She continued her studies in the evenings, encouraged by Tobias's unwavering support. Adana's bond with Zikora also deepened. She had been able to give her sister the best schooling possible, and the joy in Zikora's eyes when she received her new books and uniforms made everything worth it. It was a feeling Adana had never experienced before, the feeling of being able to provide for her family without the constant fear of failure. But as Adana's life shifted, so did the dynamics within the house. Beatrice, having left in a fury after her confrontation with Adana, had not returned. Tobias's household was quieter now, more peaceful. But there were still challenges, old habits and ways of thinking that sometimes caused tension. One day, Tobias sat Adana down in the living room. "I need to talk to you about something," he said, his tone more serious than usual. Adana felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest. "What's going on?" she asked, worried that something had gone wrong. "I've been thinking," Tobias began, pausing as if gathering his thoughts. "You've changed my life, Adana, and now I want us to take this next step together. I want you to be not just my partner in this house, but in everything. I want us to build a future together, not just as employer and employee, but as equals. I want to make our future official." He paused, his gaze intense. "Will you marry me, Adana?" Adana's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat. She had known this was coming, but now that it was here, she couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. The journey they'd been on together had felt so fast, yet so right. "Are you sure?" she asked softly, her hands trembling in her lap. "This is a big step. We've been through so much already." Tobias smiled gently, taking her hand in his. "I'm sure, Adana. I know this is fast, but I also know that what we have is real. You brought so much light into my life, and I can't imagine it without you." Adana's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe that everything she had gone through was leading to this moment, this future that Tobias was offering her. "I love you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, I will marry you." Tobias's face broke into a smile, and without another word, he pulled her into an embrace. For a long moment, they held each other tightly, both of them savoring the happiness that had finally come their way. Adana's wedding day arrived faster than she could have ever imagined. She had always dreamed of a day like this, but never in her wildest dreams had she imagined it would be real. The ceremony was intimate, with only close family and friends attending. The small village of Okibo, where Adana had once struggled to survive, now witnessed her joy as she married a man who had changed her life. Her mother, Ngozi, looked on with tears in her eyes as Adana stood at the altar, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown. Zikora beamed with pride as she stood beside her sister. And Tobias, the man who had once been a stranger in her life, stood there beside her, looking at her with love so deep it made her heart ache. As they exchanged vows, Adana realized that this moment was more than just a wedding. It was a culmination of everything she had worked for, the strength, the sacrifices, the long hours, and the struggle to survive. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where she no longer had to fight alone. "I promise to stand by you, Tobias," Adana said softly, "through every challenge and every triumph. I will love you, honor you, and be by your side for the rest of our days." Tobias smiled, his eyes glistening. "And I promise to always be there for you, Adana, to support you, to love you, and to never let go." As the ceremony ended, and they walked hand in hand down the aisle, Adana couldn't help but think of all the people who had helped her along the way. Her mother, Zikora, even the strangers who had crossed her path and reminded her that kindness still existed in this world. She had come so far, and now, with Tobias by her side, there was nothing she couldn't do. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Adana's life continued to unfold in ways she had never imagined. With Tobias by her side, her world had changed completely. The once heavy weight of survival was no longer her daily concern. Instead, she found herself embracing new dreams and possibilities, one she had never allowed herself to entertain before. Tobias' support and belief in her had given her the strength to pursue her own ambitions. She continued her education, attending school in the evenings after she completed her household duties. Tobias was always there, encouraging her, making sure she had the time and resources to succeed. Her sister, Zikora, excelled in her studies too, and with Tobias's help, Adana was able to pay for Zakora's university education. The dream of a better future for her family was finally becoming a reality. One afternoon, as they sat together on the balcony overlooking the lush garden, Tobias turned to Adana with a thoughtful expression. "Adana," he began, "I've been thinking. We've come a long way since you first started working for me. I think it's time we make another change." Adana raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What kind of change?" "I want us to leave the city. I think it's time for a fresh start, a place where we can build a home, a place for our family to grow," Tobias said, his tone filled with excitement. "I've been offered a business opportunity in the countryside, and I think it's the perfect place for us. You've worked so hard, and I want to give you a life where you don't have to worry about anything." Adana's heart skipped a beat. The thought of leaving the familiar life she had built in the city was daunting. But the more she thought about it, the more the idea of starting fresh felt right. They had overcome so much already, and now they had the opportunity to build something new, together. "I think it's a great idea," Adana said, smiling softly. "A fresh start could be just what we need. And as long as we're together, it doesn't matter where we go." Tobias smiled and took her hand in his. "Exactly. Together, we can accomplish anything." The months that followed were a whirlwind of excitement and preparation. They sold their house, packed their belongings, and said their goodbyes to the friends they had made in the city. For Adana, it was bittersweet. She had grown to love the life she had built with Tobias, and leaving was not an easy decision, but she knew it was time. The past was behind her, and the future awaited them. The move to the countryside was everything they had hoped for. The peacefulness of the land, the fresh air, and the space to grow their dreams together was just what they needed. Tobias's business thrived, and Adana found herself becoming involved in the community, offering her help to local businesses and finding new ways to contribute. As the years went by, Adana and Tobias's life together flourished. They built a beautiful home, one that Adana had always dreamed of, a place where they could welcome friends and family, a place where love and laughter filled every room. Zakora graduated from university and started her own teaching career, making Adana and Tobias proud. One evening, as they sat together in their garden, watching the sunset over the rolling hills, Adana turned to Tobias, her heart full. "We've come so far, haven't we?" Tobias smiled, his arm around her shoulders. "Yes, we have, and I couldn't have done it without you." Adana leaned her head against his shoulder, the warm breeze brushing against her skin. "You've given me everything I ever wanted. Tobias, a family, a home, and a future. I couldn't ask for more." Tobias kissed the top of her head, his heart full of gratitude. "And you've given me something I never knew I needed. Love, strength, and a sense of purpose. I'm the luckiest man in the world." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Adana knew that their journey together had only just begun. They had faced so much, struggles, fears, doubts, and had come out stronger because of it. The love they had built, the life they had created, was a testament to the power of hard work, honesty, and trust. Adana no longer worried about surviving. She no longer felt like she had to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had found someone who truly saw her, who believed in her, and who loved her for who she was. Together, they had built a life beyond their wildest dreams.